Dario Sattui, owner of Castello di Amorosa. And Castello di Amorosa literally means the castle of love. And I assure you, I've put a lot of love into this building and the castle itself. We're honored that you take a few minutes of your time to enjoy this beautiful castle that took me almost 15 years to build. And first I'd like to go through a little history of the property. This property was inhabited for thousands of years by the Wapo Indians. Wapo is a bastardized mispronunciation of the Spanish term for the Indians. The Spanish and the Mexicans thought the Indians were very good looking, so they called them Guapo, and it ended up the American pronunciation, Wapo. In any event, they had two villages. They were migratory, but had two winter encampments near my house and down further towards the highway. And the reason they had those is because there was a source of water during the winter. And we find often arrowheads, spearheads, and other artifacts left over from the Indians. The Napa Valley was first inhabited by a white person in 1836. His name was George C. Yount, and the town of Yountville is named after him. Spain had control of California for about 34 years, and then Mexico wrestled control from Spain, and they had it for 22 years. The person ruling this area for Mexico was General Mariano Vallejo. And whenever he had several daughters, whenever one of his daughters would get married, he would give a vast land tract, often thousands of acres, to the husband and wife. And one of these land tracts was given to a Dr. Bale, who married one of his daughters. Now, Dr. Bale was from England. He was a self-taught surgeon. He also had a grist and wheat mill about 3 miles south of here. And in fact, it's one of the last surviving wheat mills in the United States, and it still functions. Every weekend, volunteers make it function. So Dr. Bale then sold 2,000 acres of land to this Colonel William Nash, who had come out from Tennessee. And Nash built his house in 1848, the year gold was discovered. And Nash built the first schoolhouse in Napa County. Nash built one of the first two churches in Napa County. The first daughter born in Napa County was Nash's. The first brand in Napa County was Nash's. He was a signatory to the Bear Republic when California was a country for 40 days. He was a noted horticulturalist. He was in the California Assembly. And in fact, Nash was already famous because Nashville, Tennessee, was named after his grandfather, who was a Revolutionary War hero. So all of this is a very exciting history for me. Now, Nash planted one of California's first vineyards. He then, in 1849, 50, and then in 1852, he built a small stone winery next to my house. If you go down the hill and are turning south to go towards San Francisco, you go about 75 yards and you'll see a blue house with a double-decker porch, upper and lower story porch, and that's the old Nash house. And Fortunately, none of my renters have ever burned it down, and it was a Wells Fargo stagecoach stop. It was a small hotel, and I've tried to conserve it, and that is the old house. The new house is the house I live in, which was built in 1887, and that's a 3-story Victorian. And I have to be honest, I did not buy the property to build this winery. That thought came later. I bought the house because I love the history of the property. It has a stream that runs part of the year. It has a little lake. It has 171 acres. It has forest. It was my dream house, and now I've renovated the house, and I'm really happy there. So the idea of the castle came later. I bought the property back in 1993, April of 93. And my first thought was to replant Nash's old vineyard and to sell the grapes to my other winery, which is Sattui Winery in St. Helena. And fortunately, the property came with this great building permit that the former owner had taken 13 years to obtain. And honestly, I gave zero value to this building permit. I was going to go live in Europe part-time. Sattui Winery was doing well, enjoy the property. But I love medieval architecture. It's a malady, it's a disease. I'm so passionate about it that I can't help myself. So the building permit that I gave zero value to was probably worth several $1 million. And it allowed for 130,000 square feet of building. It allowed for wine production of 250,000 gallons, which is rather large. And it allowed for the last public tour and tasting permit ever given in Napa County. This is back in 1989. Since then, the rules have changed, and now you have to reserve to go to a winery. In any event, I wasn't going to do anything with that, but because of my love and my passion for medieval architecture, after a few months, I decided not only will I replant Nash's old vineyard, but I'll start a small winery and I'll build it in the medieval style. So the original winery was going to be 8,500 square feet, tiny. Well, it ended up about 145,000 square feet, which is about 3.5 acres of floor space. And it's on 8 levels, 4 levels below ground, 4 levels above ground. It contains 107 rooms. I tried to, in Italy years prior, just out of my own passion, I went day after day doing research on medieval castles, on monasteries, on churches, on palaces, on farmhouses. I always took a camera, a hammer, a tape measure, a sketch pad. The hammer was in case I had to pry my way into a door. I never stole anything. I'd always nail it back. But usually I got into places, and a lot of places were abandoned. And when I couldn't get into a castle I wanted to see, I would pretend I had money. I would dress in a suit and tie. I'd go to a real estate agency. I'd say, I want to buy a castle, which I couldn't afford. And usually I would get into most castles or palaces that I wanted to see that one way or another. In any event, so I'd already done my research. I'd taken thousands of photos. I had floor plans of castles. I had sketches. I was just enamored. Totally, I know there's something wrong with me, but that's something I can't help. And So everything was already done, and I had them filed by chimneys, by railings, by roof tiles, by wells, by courtyards, you name it. How to do stone on the wall. So my research essentially was already done. And so when I embarked upon this so-called 8,500 square foot building, which eventually became 145,000 square feet, I was more or less ready to go. And essentially, Castello di Amorosa is a composite of all the things, all the castles I saw in Tuscany, some I saw in Umbria, a few I saw in France, Germany, and Austria as well. But essentially, it's a composite of a Tuscan castle, my rendition of a Tuscan castle. And of course, it had to be at a strategic location, normally on a hillside or at a confluence of several rivers, or to protect a farming community so that the owner could collect his taxes. And often the castles would start with maybe just one building, maybe a tower, maybe a church. And over time, over sometimes centuries, they would evolve and be built up, and they would have more towers and perimeter walls. And we tried to replicate a castle being built and evolving over time. So there's bricked up doorways, there's windows that are closed up, because this is the way it would have happened. We even used two different quarries because one quarry was exhausted of materials, and 50 years later we found another quarry, and so on. And so naturally, Castello di Amorosa was built on a hillside. It has 5 towers. It has tall ramparts. It had to have everything to sustain life and defend the populace from invaders. And so we have 2 courtyards. We have a deep well. You had to have a source of water. The people were very religious, so we have a church, and we also have a chapel in the vineyard. We have a royal apartments, which were always upstairs because you could defend your position more easily upstairs. We have stables, and we have a prison, and of course a torture chamber, because virtually all castles in the Middle Ages had these things. And also, castles were farming centers, and here in Europe and in Italy, in Tuscany, and here in the Napa Valley, what is the main item of produce? It's often wine. And so I wanted to have a magnificent building in which to make as fine a wines as we could possibly make. And so we did so. And of course, the castle also had what was called the Great Hall. And the Great Hall was where the owner would flaunt his richness, his prestige, try to intimidate his neighbors, or they would hold huge banquets. It was the most well-appointed room in the castle. And in fact, it often had windows, which were rare in those days. And here he would administer his government, he would administer justice, receive visitors, and so forth. So we had, again, I tried to have everything a castle would have had, but of course the primary reason for our castle was to make wine. And many of the great wineries in Europe are in castles. So I think what we did was absolutely correct in doing so. It's also true, I tried to honor my Italian ancestry, honor my relatives. I really care about Italians. They're great people. I love the food. I love the people. I love the nature. And so for all of these reasons, and to have a great place for making fine wines, we built Castello di Amorosa.